Hi, my name is Marval A Rex. I am part of the Pride Public's piece, curated by Ruben Esparza, put on by One Archives. We love you. And I am here with Peter Kalisch.
Hi, everyone. My name's Peter. We're both performance artists, amongst other things. And yeah, we're both really stoked to be here and talk to each other, talk a little bit about our work, and unpack some stuff. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious for you. I've thought a lot about navigating fear in your work.
For
so
sure.
I kind of wanted to start with fear.
Yeah. Totally.
And potentially, like, what is your relationship to fear in your performance work?
Yeah.
Both you and I get categorized as artists that are very courageous and generous in terms of how we put our bodies out there. And I'm just curious about your relationship to fear and how you position it in your work.
Yeah, well, that's actually a very poignant, question. I'd say that, the most important thing to me when it comes to art is vulnerability, and vulnerability is a way to transcend fear in many ways, because we all deal with a certain amount of insecurities, and I think, through art, people can really confront their inner demons. I really believe in the power of vulnerability in art, and I think that I kind of design my work to have, for me to transcend something, whether it be a physical limitation or a mental limitation. It's always designed in order to kind of transcend some sort of limitation or societal kind of standard that we put on ourselves. Because I feel like we've categorized ourselves so strictly in our culture right now, and it can be very limiting. And I think it's important for us to find ways in our life in which to be vulnerable, not just in art, in other ways as well, in order to be more holistic human beings. But yeah, I would love to actually ask you the same question, because you do things that people would say are very daring.
Yeah. I kind of just, while you were speaking, I thought of this psychological map, which is the 3 layers of comfort. Mm-hmm. And so the center circle is comfortable, like a human feeling comfortable. We all navigate this. So the center circle is comfort, the middle circle is discomfort, and then the third circle on the outer ring is trauma, extreme discomfort. And they actually have done studies where when we're learning something new and when we're expanding our reality, we're actually in the center circle, or we're in the middle circle, which is discomfort. So when you're learning to play piano, it's uncomfortable. You're actually pushing your brain. When you're learning how to roller skate, etc. So I think that part of, at least for me, the performance practice, why I shifted, because both you and I were studio artists before we were performance artists, right? We began in 2D materials, 3D materials. Mm-hmm. I entered that middle circle of discomfort through performance art, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally.
And that has allowed me consistently. It's kind of an extreme form of discomfort sometimes.
Yeah,
but it's not traumatic, I don't think.
It's the ultimate.
And that's where I feel like I can learn. So
yeah,
I actually feel
totally.
I
agree.
Put myself in situations where I have to learn, and hopefully the audience witnessing that is also, I think you and I both, I think about putting the audience in a place of discomfort. I don't want to put the audience necessarily in a place of trauma, which is the third circle, but the second circle of I'm uncomfortable by what I'm looking at, but I'm also being asked to sort of learn, grow, expand.
Yeah.
And that, I think, definitely ties in with fear. I think that circle of discomfort is a place where there's a lot of unknown variables.
Yeah, totally. And I'm curious as to what about perhaps our upbringing or our personalities make us embrace discomfort in a way, because oftentimes so much of our culture is based on shielding us from discomfort, all the things that we find comfort in,
right,
whether it be entertainment or substances or whatever it may be. We're so removed from discomfort. And I feel an interesting question for you would be you just said you want the audience to feel uncomfortable and experience that transcendence, but like not go into the realm of trauma. So have you had performances or situations where you've had to learn how to do that carefully? Because I feel like there's been times where I've gone a little too far because I'm just thinking about myself and my own world, and you forget about the outside world. So what's that relationship been like for you?
Yeah. I think it's Adrienne Marie Brown. Is that the author? Is that her name? Okay, I got it. Adrienne Marie Brown. She, in one of her books, talks about being a performance artist before she went into like more of her larger written activism and social activism. And she actually has a paragraph where she's like, I was doing a lot of performance art, and then I realized like I was kind of just like throwing my trauma out on stage. And I didn't, and she questioned the efficacy of what she was doing.
Yeah, totally.
And 2020 gave me personally a lot of time to like question the efficacy of what I was doing, question why I was doing performance work, why I was doing performance work that dealt with like anal stimulation, dealt with the orifices, dealt with blood, dealt with things that people could perceive as self-harm, although I don't categorize it as self-harm. And I asked all those questions, and here in 2021, I feel like I'm a little bit different than Adrienne Marie Brown in the sense that I feel like I have pushed things in performance spaces. I still think that they are valuable. And I think even maybe more so now in 2021 with a very strict, like the Twitter cancel culture brigade that we're in right now. I feel happy to have done all that work, and I will continue to do work that will make people uncomfortable. I don't want to... I would say that I'm more discerning at this point, largely just because I'm also older.
Yeah, I
like
agree
I'm not
with
in my
that.
early 20s where I'm just
totally
like, I'm going to do this thing to be like shocking.
Yeah.
I'm actually trying to be a little bit more meditative with the work. A little bit more like, with so much noise that social media gives us at this point, like what am I doing in a way that's actually really quite analog? Like what we're doing is actually with our bodies. It's not being wholly mediated by digital technology. And so I think it's a gift in that way.
Totally.
But also, yes, being more discerning. But still, like, I still want to, like, I think part of what makes our work interesting is we're like, here's our bodies, they're messy.
Yeah,
bodies are messy. And in the digital sphere, we get so removed from the body, right?
Exactly, yeah. I think we're like that. I mean, if you think about the notion of discomfort, there was a time in our human evolution, in our history, where discomfort was like the name of the game. When you have to live in a nomadic, think about nomadic people, for example, our hunter-gatherer times, we didn't know where food was going to come from. We had to find our own water and shelter and things like that. So that that discomfort and the growth and strength that comes from discomfort is hardwired into us, but now we're so removed from it that I almost feel like we've forgotten it, and therefore like we don't recognize the value of it anymore. But I don't know. I think just certain things happened in my childhood and upbringing where I was uncomfortable and traumatized, but I kind of learned as I grew up how to use art to like purge that, you know? I wanted to ask you to jump to another question. What are some like pieces of art or things in culture that you saw early on in your artistry that really inspired what you're doing today?
Oh, so interesting. I love that question. Well, I'm first generation American, although I don't look like it necessarily, whatever that looks like. But it's not necessarily obvious that I am. My mother's from Barcelona, Spain. So I grew up going to Spain every year. And that's when I saw the Dalí Museum in Figueres, which is a beautiful, crazy, he built it. Dalí built his own museum. And however y'all feel about Dalí, he was being in that museum at the age of like 7 years old. Like I remember crying as a young person. I had tears in my eyes at that museum. I was just so emotionally moved by it. And I think that surrealism really caught me first because as a young queer and trans person, being in fantasy worlds, that was a safe space, right? Like being in a world that felt alternate, felt outside of the reality that I was navigating as someone who felt different. Like I felt different from a very young age, in relationship to other children. It was amazing to be like, wow, Dalí built his own world. I can build my own world. And that, I think, was why it was so emotional, and very touching for me just overall in my practice. And I think surrealism in general, but Dalí specifically, going to his own museum in Figueres was very important.
Yeah. Dalí's awesome. It's amazing. Definitely revolutionary.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yes. And I feel the familial, just because he and I are from the same region of the world, like I feel that. I feel that like connection. Mm-hmm. How about you? Do you artists that?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I'm trying to think of stuff that was like highly influential. I mean, I have to say that like I'm more inspired by like activism and like music, honestly, than other forms of art, you know? Like, obviously there's art that's been I mean, David Hammons, like when I saw his stuff, I loved it. Just the turning something very that fine line between beautiful and grotesque, like stuff like that has always been really influential to me. Like people that mix art and activism, like MIA, like the rapper, like was huge. I was like obsessed with her for like years. I still love her. Like she's so good. People that just like talk about real shit. I mean, even things like Edward Snowden or like WikiLeaks, you know, stuff where people really took a risk in order to do something they really believed in. Like I really always found that to be super inspirational. But yeah, I mean, mostly like music. I'm trying to think of like art. There's like David Hammons, Rachel Harrison is like a sculptor that I really like. I saw her show at Region Projects. That was like really inspirational. Actually, I'm more inspired like when we get together, like when we were talking about Queerspace and stuff like that. Like when
I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the curatorial projects.
Yeah, like I'm more inspired by like when people come together and like you feel that palpable energy in a sense of community. I think that's so lacking in our society right now, and that's what really inspires me. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, I wanted to explore more the idea that I think we both share around curation, and I think Ruben Esparza is also really in this lane of looking at curation as a medium, as an artistic medium. I know that I consider all of my curatorial work as like basically like a large performance pieces that I control only so much of because other people are performing and doing their own thing. And I think it's also a very powerful form of activism.
Totally.
So I'm curious as to like what, you know, the audience may not know, but like you are the founder of Queerspace, or did you take it on?
I took it on. So the person who is the founder is named Jordan Kramer. She's really cool, but she moved to Philadelphia and she needed someone to take over. And it was funny because I feel the same thing happened with performance art. Everything that I do that is what I do is just happened very organically. Like I never really thought of myself as a curator. You kind of just fall into I'm sure you can relate. You kind of just fall into stuff and you do it and you're like, oh, this is the new thing. So but yeah, it's amazing. Queerspace is like, it's so cool to be able to curate other artists, especially, you know, doing performance myself. I think I feel a little hollow or like shallow if I'm just focusing on my own work for a while. It feels a little like purposeless. So I think a great way to mitigate that feeling is to curate and to be like of service to other artists. Queerspace is a party, and you know, I call it a movement, a burgeoning movement that's it's a party slash performance night that specializes in kind of like the darker sides of queer identity. It's basically a scene that I wanted to create based on the experiences we had feeling just different than a lot of the queer art that goes on right now. So it's like techno, noise, metal, hardcore, post-punk.
I feel like on that note, I feel like Queerspace is like an experimental space, whereas like a lot of queer art in the 21st century has been in the legacy of like identity politics and like really strongly identifying with LGBTQ. And not that we're not doing that at Queerspace, but there's this, I would say that there's, at least my practice is very slippery. I like to say that, and messy. And I think that being able to experiment and have abject work, have work that has like an element of horrorcore to it, doing things that would potentially make other larger arts institutions uncomfortable. It's great to have it. I just thank you for having Queerspace so that we have a space where we can,
part of it.
You know, do that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for being a part of it. I mean, it's like, it's like not that I am trying to shit on anything else in the scene. It's just that I think that there is like such an untapped market of queer people that feel very just not, that we don't feel connected to the popular queer culture, gay culture, whatever you want to call it. You know, it's like very, the popular queer art is very like poppy. It's
commodified.
Almost a little like decadent in a way, which sounds like negative, and commodified, yeah, for sure. And I think that in Queerspace we can connect to a deeper energy, almost like a spiritual kind of thing, rather than basing things off of things that are social signifiers and stuff like that, you know?
Yes.
Another thing that I think is like should be more prevalent in the queer community is like a respect of our elders and even an understanding of our history, because history has become completely just like horizontal to the point where people don't even learn about people that came before them. Ron Athey really set the precedent of breaking so many barriers for performance artists to where now when you stick needles in your face, there's actually people that know what you're talking about, you know? I mean, he really...
I think it's interesting, too, I'll say, and then we can kind of shift into a resolution moment. But I think that it's interesting when you think about Sheree Rose, Bob Flanagan, and Ron Athey. And even for me, like, Paul McCarthy is a huge influence on my work. He and I were both born in Salt Lake City. The interesting thing about at least my practice, and I think your practice, is that we're not just sticking needles or like using blood as this sort of spectacle, which I think sometimes people are like, oh, it's a spectacle. I'm also like, I'm looking at this legacy and this lineage of artists who I respect profoundly, and I'm taking from them, as any good artist does, and I'm also expanding upon what the dialogues that they are expanding on, and also, for me at least, when I mention Bob Flanagan, when I mention Ron Athey, when I mention Paul McCarthy, William Popel, I'm talking about like people who were assigned male, who lived and had to navigate maleness, and through their performance art have actually like destroyed ideas of masculinity and built up new ones. And that's obviously something that's of interest in my life and my work. So it's complicated. Like I think practices, and I think you're right, things get really flattened in our culture right now, where they're just like, this is the thing you're doing, and it's polarizing. And it's actually like everyone's lives are far more complicated. Our practices are far more complicated. They're nuanced. And it takes like critical analysis. It takes listening. It takes having conversations, which we have less and less of course, because of COVID right now. And I hope that we can move into a world where we have a lot more conversations and a lot more listening happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there needs to be more like curiosity about things that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And therefore we can like learn from each other, and you don't have to agree with it or condone it, but it could be more like, like you're different than me. Like, what can I learn from you, you know? So,
speaking of discomfort, speaking of feeling out of your comfort zone, we're going to be performing in conjunction with One Archives.
October 9th.
Yes, on October 9th at the
Los
Angeles
State Historic Park.
Yes! We will both be performing semi-together, semi-separately.
It's not going to be the first time, too. We've
it won't
done
be the
that
first
before.
time. Thank you to Ruben.
Super.
Thank you to Juan. Yeah.